It's often exciting to look to the future of UNO, what it might be like in times to come. Sometimes, though, it's important to stop and take a good look at the past of the university, the people and the happenings that help make the excitement of future history possible. With this in mind, join me for Reflections in Time. It's the summer of 1985, and we're in the beautiful new Health, Physical Education, and Recreation Faculty Lounge overlooking, I can look out and see the engineering building and part of the northern part of the campus. And as we came to campus today to do a Reflections in Time, one can see a bustle of activity. To the west, the makings of an eventual large parking lot in the new land we've acquired, and a science building, and on campus, as we look back just a few years, so many buildings and so many people that we didn't have. But what we do on this particular series of programs, as some of you know, I think, is reflect on the past, as well as perhaps a little bit about the future of the university and of the people who were important to it. One of those people has been here probably longer than anyone else who is now currently attached to our campus, and I'm talking about Dr. Joyce Minteer of our business college. Joyce has been with the university for many, many years, and so I asked her on this pretty summer day to come by and visit with me about her time here at the university. Joyce, it's nice to have you, and I don't think in all the years we've known each other, which is a number of them, that I really ever asked you where your beginnings were. Where did you come from? I've always known you as a part of the university. Well, that wasn't always the case, of course.
Almost all of it.
Almost.
Really almost all my adult life.
Yeah.
Because I came here to the University of Omaha as a freshman, and started my first 2 years at the old campus out on North 24th Street.
Yeah, but even going back beyond that, you were born, as I remember just before we started to record, out in Neely, wasn't it?
Yes, I was born in Neely, lived there about 4 years.
Big family, small family?
I have an older brother and sister.
Uh-huh.
And a 94-year-old mother.
Is that right?
Still alive.
Wonderful.
But we lived in Lincoln for a few years, and but we lived mostly in Omaha.
When you say Neely, were you farm people, or did you live in town out there? Or what?
Farm.
Uh-huh.
Not too happy experience at that time.
That's one of the reasons you started moving.
After the war, you know, after World War I.
Times were kind of hard.
Times were hard, and so then we moved to Lincoln, and then finally to Omaha.
What year did you come to Lincoln? Do you recall roughly?
Now, let's see, I would have been in about third grade, so I can't.
Well, it'll be back in the.
But mostly, for the most part, I lived in Omaha.
Yeah.
Because we came back to Omaha. I attended 8th grade.
What is the reason for your family coming to Omaha? Because of work?
My father's work, yes.
What did he do?
He was a railway postal clerk.
Oh, was he? And here was a big center for postal activity.
And he ended his last several years at the post office out at the airport.
Mm-hmm.
So that was why we came here. I attended North High School.
Oh, high school up north. Yeah.
And then came to Omaha U.
Yeah. Now, when you were deciding, this is a tough question because it doesn't go back a ways, Joyce, but when you were deciding about going to college, what were your reasons, if you can remember, why you came to this one?
One, financial. Financial. There's no way in the world I could have afforded to attend college if I couldn't have attended here in Omaha. I lived at home. Tuition then was $3 a credit hour.
$3.
I paid it on the installment plan. Did some work on campus.
You know, when you mention on campus, I think a lot of people who might be watching this tape have no recollection, unless they've seen a few pictures, of what North 24th campus was like. So I wish, as best you can, Joyce, you'd describe it. What buildings were there, and what were they used for?
Well, basically, we had one building that was the classroom building. We had a gymnasium, and then across the street there was a big old house, and that was used for offices.
Was that the Reddick house?
I I think so.
Big, lot of bric-a-brac on it?
I remember going to tutoring sessions for humanities with Dr. Payne over in that building, and then on 24th and Ames they had what they called the science building, and that was just a ramshackle building where I remember I took some math courses there, but the science classes were there.
Well, that was a little bit separated then from the other buildings.
Because we were, well, let's see, Pratt was, I don't know, but several blocks.
Yes. Now, when you came there, what was it like in terms of the student body? Was it pretty small? Of course it is compared to today, but...
It was small. You knew almost everybody. We did have some local sororities and other organizations. So
did you?
We had, you know, the usual campus activities and sports, not to the extent that we have now, but we had basketball and football and so on. And so it was probably a pretty typical university of the time, except that it was all, then I think all people who lived in Omaha.
And $3 an hour, that was still a lot of money in those days, but yet for going to college it was certainly inexpensive.
Right.
Had you decided when you started what you'd like to be and what you wanted to do, or did you just decide I want to go to college?
Well, basically I wanted to go to college, and I think really I ended up in what has been my entire career because of a counselor that I encountered as a freshman. The name of this person? Gloria Sinnett.
Oh, how I knew her
Gloria
too.
Sinnett.
Who was with the university for so many years.
And she was so helpful and so interested, and I just thought, well, if that was her field, I thought it was going to be my field too. And of course, I've branched out from that, but still in the field of business.
Yeah, Gloria Sinnett, when you mention her, we ought to sometime have her come and do a tape if we could have, because she made an impact on...
She certainly did.
...thousands of people, I think, in what they took and in general on the impressions of a good life well spent.
Very much so.
The university, though, was pretty different, wasn't it? Kind of small, as you say, kind of a small student body. What kind of course offerings were you able to take? Was it kind of limited? What was that like?
I suppose, particularly in terms of what you can get today, but as far as...
Didn't seem that way then.
No, as far as the basics, you know, you got your economics and English, and of course then I was taking secretarial courses. But, you know, introduction to business and business law and all those, the basic courses we still could get.
Well, you mentioned Dr. Payne, who was with the university, of course, well into the 50s and spent a long life here, and an illustrious one. He was there on the faculty. Other names of people that you remember who were involved with the university at that time?
Oh, let's see, Rod Crane. You probably know of him at least.
Economics.
Economics. I'm trying to think of ones that are still here, or that, you know, you might remember.
Who was the president at that time?
Roland Haynes.
Oh, yeah. Who was, of course, the president first out here, too.
Yes, he had just taken over after Dr. Seelock.
And Dr. Seelock met with a rather untimely death, didn't he?
Right.
Had a lot of pressures, and...
yes, he took his own life.
And that happened in about the mid-30s, didn't it?
Let's see. My sister, let's see, she's 2 years ahead of me, so she came in 34, and I think it was just, she had a 4-year Regent Scholarship, and I think that he perhaps was present when she received the scholarship, but Roland Haynes was present when she came that fall.
You know, as you describe it, and some others have, it must have been a rather cozy place. But were times kind of hard? Did they sort of have trouble making ends meet? I've heard some say they had problem, for example, getting enough coal and all these things to keep things warm. Things were, you know, not very plush.
Well, not plush at all, but I don't think in my day quite that bad. I mean, as far as I know, they were able to heat the facilities without any trouble. But, you know,
But your association with the university then began really in the 30s as a student.
Yes, I came in the 30s.
And as you went along, did you decide pretty much what you wanted to do when you were still up there in North 24th?
Yes, at that time I was more in the secretarial field, and I thought I would teach shorthand and typewriting, which I did for a while.
And for which there was a tremendous demand still for typing, but shorthand was a very important part of a secretary's life, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So, now, one of the interesting things about your background, as I recall it, Joyce, was that you were on both campuses. Now, do you remember the transition? What happened? Did you start hearing about it? Were they talking about moving and building a new campus? How did this, in your memory, all come about?
Well, of course, there was the need for expansion, and Dr. Haynes felt it was vital to the university to expand, and we're able to get this property out here if it could be annexed to the city of Omaha.
Yeah, now this property in those days was not in Omaha.
No, it was not in Omaha, and of course it was a municipal university. It had to be built
on city
property, and so that it had to be annexed. And there were real campaigns, students carrying petitions all around Omaha to get approval, urging the council to extend the limits.
Now, was it just the council need to do this? Did all the people have to vote on it? Do you recall? Did they have a citywide vote? What?
I think it was a citywide vote.
Do you recall, was there, at that time, we had Creighton University in the city, of course, was there much opposition to moving the university out here and expanding it in this way?
When it came right down to it, I don't think there was. I think there was talk, in the process. But as I recall, when it came right down to the vote, that it passed,
Now, the period, I find this interesting. I'd like to find out more about this. When you were up on North 24th, did everybody just sort of pick up and move out here? How did that occur? Do you recall? What was out here when you first came, I guess, too?
Well, just the one building. What's now the Arts and Science building was the administration building, and that was it.
But that was completed when you came?
Yes, we came to that, and of course our library, our cafeteria, everything was in that one building.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And
that was a beautiful building. It still is.
Yes, they, let's see, the class of, I make my sister any older than she is, 38 was the last class on the North 24th Street campus, but they held their graduation exercises on this campus.
Well, your sister then was the last group of seniors, among the last group of seniors on the North campus.
1938, and I remember I thought, this big new building, I wouldn't know my way around, and so I came out and took a summer school class that summer just to get acquainted with the campus.
I bet it was a beautiful, nicely smelling new building, huh?
And air-conditioned.
Yeah. That was unusual, wasn't it?
Yes. Yes.
And that was quite an attraction, I would think.
Very much so. I did my graduate work at Indiana, and I used to suffer through the hot summers there. Of course, I'm sure they have a lot more air conditioning now than they did then, too, but I think of it longing of this nice, cool building back here.
It really was rather far-sighted for the university to do that, make use of those artesian wells and air condition this very big building. Well, then your sister graduated, but you were still a student when all this happened.
Yes, yes.
And you were involved in a campaign to make it possible to do this.
I carried petitions to get signatures.
Did everybody as students, did they look forward to that, or did they kind of like it up North Omaha?
Oh, I think they were pretty excited about coming out here. Because we have more space, more facilities. And we needed to grow just as we have needed to grow ever since.
Yeah. So it was a transition that was easy for the student body and the faculty, and they really liked it.
I think so. I think so.
Now, try to picture, if you can, Joyce, you lived in the city, you grew up near here, really, in Lincoln and that sort of thing, but your first impressions of this part of the campus, what it was like, it must have been a rather pretty place.
It was beautiful. Green grass and trees and space.
Yeah.
Which we're sacrificing some today, but we're still, I think they're still doing a good job at maintaining what green space, green trees, and so on that they can.
The main building just sort of sat there on 52 acres. Was it, did they have a lot of trees and flowers, or was it just sort of out here by itself?
No, we had trees all up and down we used to have the walk, up down where you could see the tower, and the trees all the way down on both sides.
Down to Dodge Street. Which was then a 2-lane road, wasn't it?
Right.
It also had beautiful trees alongside, didn't it? So it was a pretty, really almost out of the city
Really,
campus.
yeah, almost rural, and you know, people would wonder, why do you want to move clear out there?
Yeah.
Well,
Really, there wasn't any city beyond it at all, was there?
practically none. Practically none.
So they did put it at what they felt was the city limits at the time.
Right.
And I suppose that, among other things, was a little less expensive, too, to get that kind of land.
Might have
That
been.
sort of thing, yeah. Well, you're still going to college, you come out here. Did you notice any differences, or was it much the same? Did it grow bigger in a hurry? What were those first years out here like, Joyce?
I think I may have mentioned, I had my junior and senior year, and I was a member of the first class that had over 100 students, 100 seniors. We had 104, as I recall.
Big class.
That was the first class, and of course it's gone on since then.
Yeah.
And having been here all these years, though, of course I was here during the war years, when I think we had a student body of like 400.
Yeah.
And then when all the fellows came back after the war and through our big bootstrap program, that was when I really I was out of teaching for a while.
Oh, were you?
Because when I worked in the Dean of Students office.
Oh.
And,
now, jumping ahead a little bit there, Joyce, I want to stay with those pre-war years.
Okay.
You came out here and you were still a student, and it was growing, but it was still a rather small university, certainly. Did we still have really the liberal arts college, and was that about it? When did we start having more than that?
Well, we had the liberal arts and the applied arts.
So the applied arts was here when we moved
Yes.
out.
Carl Helmstadter was the head of applied arts.
Uh-huh.
And of course that included engineering. And
What is included in there?
So engineering and business.
But those were the two
Those were the
main
main ones.
divisions or departments within that college. So it wasn't a very big college, certainly.
No.
No. And at that time, you were still a student, but you graduated, and how is it you ended up staying right here?
Well,
Or didn't you?
Well, I really was just gone for 2 years. I went to Indiana University the next year to get and earned my MBA.
Oh, you started to kept going right to school?
I kept going, and then I did teach for a year in a school in Milford, Connecticut. And then when Dean Lucas was to be Dean of Students, why, he asked me to come back and work for him.
What did you teach as secretarial things in Milford? At a high school or a
It
college?
was really I'd say a 2-year secretarial school is what it was, a private one.
But you had a yen to come back to the good old Middle West.
Yes, I like the Middle West.
And you had a chance to come back to the university. And you mentioned Dr. Lucas as we were getting into that other part.
He was both head of the Division of Business Administration and Dean of Students. He combined the two.
Yeah,
And,
he really came here, didn't he, as the Dean of Students?
No, he came in business.
Oh, did he?
His, in fact...
But he got the other added to it, huh?
Yes, that was added to it. I see. 38 was our first year out here, and that was his first year here also, I think.
I see. So he came really when the university moved here.
Dean Lucas came first just as a member of the College of Applied Arts and taught marketing, and then eventually moved into more responsibility and became a head of the Division of Business Administration within the College of Applied Arts. And I believe in 1942 he became Dean of Students and combined that position and heading the Division of Business Administration.
So he had lots of jobs.
He had lots of jobs. And then his goal, when he no longer had to be Dean of Students, he really concentrated on building our college so that we could be accredited by the AACSB, which we did achieve under him.
Now, when you first came back from Connecticut after receiving your MBA at Indiana University, did you come back with the intention of, staying here in Omaha at the university, or you just sort of come here in between because an opening came? How did that come about, Joyce?
Pretty much. I had worked for Dean Lucas as a grader when I was an undergraduate, and when I had the opportunity to work with him again, I thought this would be worthwhile.
You liked working with Dean Lucas?
But I really didn't think I'd be staying here the rest of my life.
It's interesting the way things work out, isn't it? But you started then, what did you do as you first worked with him? Were you in his office? What was your attachment to his office?
Kind of, I guess I was called an administrative assistant.
And we have them still today, but so you really were Dean Lucas's assistant?
Yes.
Did you deal with student matters in the dean's office as well as in the business school, or how did that work?
Well, first it was pretty much in the dean's office. And then, of course, when he became, well, by the time he was moving into developing the division into a separate college, I was teaching full-time then. I was no longer working for him.
One thing I wanted to ask you, you know, we talked about Dean Lucas for the last minutes, and talked about the Dean of Students. And people who watch this tape today, in 1985 or beyond, 1990, if they check the roster at the University of Faculty and Staff, they don't find a person listed by that name necessarily. Now, back in the 40s there, what did the Dean of Students do at a university that didn't have dormitories? What were some of the problems and things that your office was involved with, Joyce?
Well, we did have a Dean of Women also at that time. And if we'd had a Dean of Men, I guess that would have been Mr. Lucas. But all of the activities, the social activities, the fraternities and sororities, and the other organizations, they were responsible for all of the approving and planning of those things. And of course, then they had big homecoming. They had a big My Day parade in the spring, and any disciplinary problems that came up, those all came to the Dean of Students.
You mentioned My Day. People, again, in 85, they don't know what in the world was that. What was that all about, Joyce?
Well, Mai, as I understand it, is the Indian word for May. And so it was kind of a May Day. And I think back in the very early days on the old campus, they even had a maypole dance and things like that. But during those years, they did have the parade, and of course they elected a Mai princess. And I was one.
Oh, yeah.
And then they used to put on skits. The various organizations would put on skits in the afternoon, and then they'd have their dance in the evening. So it was really an all-day affair.
And it was also a day without classes, wasn't it?
Right. It was a day without classes. And but the organizations put a lot of effort into their both floats and skits.
It was a nice tradition and a thing that really grew and was going well into the 50s and so on too, wasn't it? Now, as you worked in that office, did you notice any change in the size and the development, the type of student body? Was it getting to be any different as it grew here?
Well, of course, after, as I think I mentioned, during World War II, we were down to 400 students, I believe.
Yeah.
And then we had the influx, of course, of veterans returning to school, and also after that, a tremendous bootstrap program. Military people coming back to finish their degrees. And then the campuses just kept growing. The enrollment has continued to grow.
Now, the business school, of which you were part there, both in the office and working with the dean, that came about in that period after the war, didn't it? Or what was about roughly the time when it happened?
You should have warned me. I checked my dates.
That's all right. You can ballpark it.
It's hard to remember.
But it was after World War II, wasn't it?
Yes.
Did it come because it was just getting too big? How did it happen? Do you recall? As a division, that is.
Of course, Mr. Lucas, I think, was pretty far-sighted, and we were growing, and he felt it was important for us to be accredited, and that meant, at that time, I think the teaching load was 15 credit hours. Well, for AACSP, the maximum was 12 credit hours. So that was a big change that had to affect the whole university, not just our college.
Oh, yeah.
And there were regulations about class size, and of
not
course,
being just so big.
So big in terms of student to teacher ratio, and you had to have the terminal degrees. So it was a matter of building a faculty that either had or was earning terminal degrees.
Now the faculty, let's stop there. That's the key important part along with students. The faculty was pretty small, wasn't it, there for a while?
Yes.
Oh, describe the kind of teaching people we had as it got going there. Accounting, I suppose. What are some of the areas that we had?
We had accounting and retailing. We had a department of retailing and a head of retailing at that time. That's now been absorbed into marketing. We had retailing and marketing and real estate. And of course, accounting. We had all the basic programs, so that when I graduated, and to say this was 1940, and went to Indiana University, which is a very large school, I had no problem at all competing with students from any other colleges, no matter how big they were.
You felt that you'd had a good, solid education.
I'd had the background. I wouldn't have had the specialization areas that they might have had, but as far as basic business background, I had it. And
now, those young people who were students in the division before it became a college, and in that transitional period, what sorts of people were they? Did we have a lot of downtown people, let's say adults, or was it mainly the young people coming out here to school?
Mostly young people then, mostly young people.
What kind of majors? What were some of the things they majored in? What did they come here for? What did they end up as, I guess I should say?
When I graduated, you really couldn't your major was business administration.
That was it.
You see, you really couldn't specialize. Because there weren't that many course offerings.
So you had a general business degree.
A basic business education, yes.
And that continued then almost until the time when the college began?
Building up to that, yes. We had, you know, remember Glenn Lewis? Did you know Glenn Lewis? In real estate, he built a tremendous real estate program. And the retailing, Herf Davison. Accounting, of course, we had Bill Hockett.
Yes.
And George Harris in finance.
So there were a lot of good, key people.
We've had, I think that's been one major factor over the whole years in the growth of this college to where it is today, has been the quality of faculty.
Now, we've talked about people, and we'll come back and talk about them a lot in the minutes ahead, but I was wondering about facilities. When you came out here as a student from the North Omaha campus, you had one building, and it was a nice one, and it was a new one. Now, for your college, or eventually college, but Division of Business, did you have good facilities? What were they like? Were they just classrooms with desks? Did you have a lot of typewriters? What did you have?
Well, we had a typing room with typewriters, but basically, otherwise it was just classrooms.
So the facilities were adequate, but not terribly extensive.
Right, right.
Now, I was interested too. You, when you first came back with your master's degree and having taught a bit out in the school in Connecticut, you came back here and you really weren't teaching at first, were you?
No, I didn't teach for a few years.
Did you do that because you would rather do office work? How did that come about? Or was that where the opportunity was? Remember, Joyce?
I just, well, basically, I think I stayed because I liked to work with, I had a good dean to work for. And
the main attraction was Dean Lucas.
And well, yes, and the people that I had to work with. I have some friends that I've made then that are still friends today.
Isn't that wonderful?
And like Yvonne Harsh. You know, and it was just that, and I rather liked being in the same town with my parents.
Sure.
I have my brother and sister lived other places. And I like the Midwest.
So there were a lot of personal as well as professional attachments that you liked that helped bring you back here. But then after a little while you decided to teach some more. Or maybe you were asked, or however it came about.
Well, I was given the opportunity because of the growing enrollments.
And you had the qualifications.
And then that meant, that also meant I had to start back to school again. So I, went summer after summer after summer.
Years and
to
years
Indiana
and years of summer school.
Took 1 year off.
Did you go to Indiana, did you say?
Took 1 year off to go there full time.
What were you teaching when you were a doctoral student and you were first back in the classroom? What were some of the things you were teaching then,
I was still teaching shorthand and typewriting.
Those were still strong areas.
And then I had the opportunity to move into business communications, and that's been first part-time, and now that's my whole field.
Well, let's go back to Indiana. You seem to have an attachment to that university too. You like the program there, and in fact we've had other people in your college who've come to us from Indiana, as I recall, too, Indiana and Iowa and places like that, really Midwestern universities with strong business.
It has an excellent business program. Others too, of course, but very good program in business.
Well, you seem to have settled down into teaching now pretty well, didn't you, Joyce?
Yes.
And you said business communication. Now, I've been in communication quite a while myself, so I think for our friends who watch this tape, we ought to ask you to define just exactly what that is.
Well, primary is it's written communication, which is, as I think you know, one of the most difficult levels, because all you have are words on paper, and you can't travel with them and say, well, I didn't really mean that. All kinds of business letters, short reports, memos, long reports, special reports. It's just an attempt to, fine-tune the writing skills and try to get rid of the excess verbiage and things like that, so that you get your message across so it can be understood the first time it's read and bring about the kind of reaction, hopefully, that you want. Which is easier said than done.
That's an interesting observation, because the said part of this is what I work with, and all forms of communication are so difficult to really not be misunderstood.
Right.
So you deal and dealt over the years with communicating on paper, and doing it properly, not only the kinds of things, but what you ought to say.
Right.
And the form as well as content.
Right, what you should say and how you should say it.
Now, that's the sort of thing that I suppose in the early years of business schools was sort of included in other things, but it became a specialty area.
Yes, it is, and more so in some schools than it is here. We're kind of handicapped with funds. We can barely meet the needs of the required course that we have now.
What are the required courses that we have in the area that you've been associated with lots of students over the years?
Well, basically, this has been my field. And of course, to begin with, they all had to take me before they could graduate. Now we've grown so that we have other people teaching, and I don't know them all anymore.
But everyone must take some business written communication type of skill training.
Right.
Well, that seems like a reasonable expectation.
But we really need it's now a sophomore level course. We really need a junior and senior level course.
With that area of concern, this is interesting and important to lots of people. It's so hard to communicate, even with friends and relatives by mail. What are some of the basic things that people have the most trouble with in preparing a nice letter?
Well, I think when they start, the start is difficult, and they fall back on cliches. This is in reply to your letter of June 15th, in which you asked something or other. Well, you couldn't answer the letter if you hadn't received it.
No.
And you know what you asked. But it's a crutch, to fall back and just repeat that, rather than to really start out with what the person wants to know.
It's sort of hard to get to the point, isn't it?
Right.
And you spend a lot of time trying to get people to do that.
To get to the point, but if it's bad news, we say, take a little longer, because we don't want to hit them in the face with the bad news. We try to pave the way for it, because most people want to know if you're turned down for something. They want to know why. And if you tell them no to begin with, sometimes they never read the why.
Now, as far as business communication is concerned, you've been doing this for a long time now, Joyce, for many, many years. Has the basic substance and the approach, because of technology or just the culture in which we live, has a lot of it changed quite a bit from back in the 40s and 50s?
Not as much as you'd think, because it's still, it should be reader-oriented, you-oriented, we talk about. I do think we're going to more and more be moving into, and should be, into word processors, so that, which makes it much easier for people to revise their writing, rather than having to scratch it out and write it over by hand. But the basic concepts of considering the reader and the reader's feelings, and cutting out the unnecessary words and so on, pretty much the same. In fact, I had a book that was published in about 1850, and in the prologue said much the same things that we'd say today. The letters that illustrated it didn't illustrate it that way, but really the basic approach hadn't really changed all that much, because it's the reader that's important.
Yeah, people are important in how they feel. One last thing, Joyce, about business letters. Didn't they used to be so formal in the way we would make salutation and the way we'd say goodbye? What were some of the things in that 1850 book that you can remember?
Well, the closing almost was like, hoping this finds you in good health, I remain your obedient servant, John Brown.
And then how would we say hello? Like, hi, Mom? We wouldn't say that. We would have some more formal statement, wouldn't we?
I think they still used the gentleman. But they'd set up right pattern letters, and they would be so general that you could use them for almost any situation. You know, if it was an overdue bill, they never mentioned the amount because that would have to be personalized, individualized. But this book even had letters like from a father to his daughter who was going to work in the big city, and letters like that. So, as well as illustrations of business letters, because suddenly they were having to write because they couldn't talk to everyone face to face.
But didn't we tend, as the years went along, to be a little less formal in our approach often?
Yes, we're have I think changed till today. We, as I say, we can't exactly write as we talk, or we'd have some pretty long-winded letters.
Yeah.
But the kind of vocabulary that we use in conversation is this kind of vocabulary we should use in our writing. There's no reason to say, I would like to take the opportunity to thank you for your help.
You might as well just say thanks.
Thanks for your help.
Yeah.
And we still fight some of those cliches. But
speaking of cliches, another thing I think along this line are typewriters. You talked about teaching typing, and also a few minutes ago you mentioned a word processor. Now the computer and the processor and all that stuff that's been coming along in the 80s and 70s, does that make a lot of difference in your work and the way you approach it? Are you teaching differently now, or are the possibilities different because of the technology? Well,
the basic underlying philosophies, I think, are the same. But we have to realize that students are going to be using word processors when they get on their job, if they aren't already. Some of them are. And they need to know, I think it should improve writing because it makes it so much easier to revise.
You won't have a tendency to let it go because it's hard to correct or start over again.
You can throw out this whole sentence if you want to, or change this word.
Don't have to tear out the page.
Put one paragraph up here when it should have been down here, and so on. So in the long run, hopefully, it will mean that people will write still better because it is easier to revise.
Well, over the years in education, what we've often tried to do are make things easier, more interesting, and help people be more productive. And I think what you've been trying to do certainly is along those lines. I want you to go back in now. Let's go scramble back in history a little bit, Joyce. When you came here as a student in the late 30s, you came to a campus that had one building. Well, between 1938 and 1985, wow.
But the second building, you know what the second building was?
Which was?
The field house.
Yes. Now, did some people question that? Wonder
I think so.
Why did that happen? Do you remember?
Well, it's just kind of the politic thing, I guess. But we really were crowded for academic facilities, you know.
Yeah, the library was sort of jammed over in a corner, wasn't it?
Very much so.
And here came this big field house. Was there some community support? Was that one of the reasons?
I think there was, yes.
Dr. Bill's very interested in sports too, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
And they were playing the games, like basketball games, there in the ballroom, or whatever we called it here in this building, the Arts and Science Hall, right?
It was, well, yes, it was an auditorium. They used it to put on their plays, and they used it to play basketball.
It was for everything back then.
It was all purpose.
Yeah. Multimedia room, as we'd say today, maybe.
Probably.
But then we got the field house. So now the 52 acres we started with out here, we're starting to get a little smaller in a way. What is the next thing that popped up that you recall that was important in the way of building?
I think the library. I think it was the library.
Now that was a big thing, wasn't it?
It certainly was. It certainly was. It was a real thrill.
Were you here when they moved all the books over?
Well, I wasn't present personally.
Well, here they had quite a lineup of students and parades, in effect carrying books from the main building over to the new library. Then what what came next? The business college, for example, doesn't have a building yet in this history of things. You were still housed in the main building, as we called it. Yeah.
Yes, we were there until, well, I suppose 10 or 12 years ago.
Well into the 70s. The next building that came after the library was the next two buildings, I guess, were Kaiser Hall and trying to think of the education building.
That is Kaiser.
That is Kaiser. What's the other one? The science one?
Allwine.
Allwine. But those are the next ones. And applied. We forgot to mention applied arts. That building preceded those. That came first. But gradually, the campus here really started to blossom and change and grow, didn't it, Joyce?
Right.
Now, during this period of growth and change, although the business college was still in that main building, did things seem to change generally? Did the quality of life on campus change? Did the student body change? What was it like as it started to really blossom?
Well, I suppose I'm a little insular in a way, because I was tied up so closely with the College of Business, and most of the activities and the groups that developed from there, and I had a lot more to do with that than I did with the other areas of the campus.
Well, was the business college changing quite a bit because things were growing here too?
It was growing. We were able to have our areas of specialization.
Yeah, when did they really get started, Joyce? When did we start? Like you said, you got a business, general business degree. Well, there got to be lots of specialties.
Well, they just kind of grew, I think. As I say, I think real estate was probably one of the first. And
with Glenn Lewis.
With Glenn Lewis, and retailing with Herff Davison. And of course, the accounting was always strong.
Was there a demand, in a nice way, from the community for these things? Or did we say, hey, I think we ought to do this because there'd probably be a demand? How did we start to add? We added a lot of stuff here.
I think now with the retailing, I think there was quite a demand from local department stores.
There just wasn't much of anything nearby on that subject, was there?
But a lot of it was feeling that these were things that our students should be able to take advantage of if they were interested in them. And I think they've grown more to meet student needs in terms of also opportunities for students in those areas.
So the business college really got rolling in the late 50s and 60s, didn't it, mainly? And then, of course, 70s on up to today. And now it's the biggest college on campus.
It has been for a while.
Yeah.
And of course, both our undergraduate and graduate program are AACSB accredited.
And what does that mean?
That's the American Assembly of Collegiate Schools of Business. I think they've changed their name. And I wish I knew the numbers, because in terms of the total numbers of College of Business in the United States, the ones who are accredited are not a very big proportion.
So we're really a privileged group.
The professional accreditation, and because of that accreditation, we could have a chapter of Beta Gamma Sigma, which is the scholastic honorary for students in the College of Business. Almost like your Phi Beta Kappa, but it's for students in business administration, and it's strictly academic.
So we've been gaining some national recognition then too in the business school.
Yes.
And business college. We should have started calling it a school for so long. Now, the thing about college, a division, anything that makes a place great, it's really people, isn't it?
Right.
And over these many years, Joyce, you've known a lot of people. And what I think is the growth and change in the campus and the facilities, let's talk about some of the people. You've been here really since the 30s, and lots of people have touched your life and you theirs. And I think we ought to talk about some of those people that you think are important to you, and of course in turn off into the university. Who would you like to start with? I think the one you mentioned, we could start with Dean Lucas.
Dean Lucas.
He's the reason you came back here, I guess.
Yes.
Let's talk about him a little. What makes him such a great man in your book?
I think his foresight, for one thing, and also his fairness. He's, I think, one of the fairest people I've ever known. and he certainly is willing to give people a break and to back up his people. And I think, as I say, I think those are a couple of things about him that I've felt were...
Another thing you mentioned earlier I think was so important, he had a lot of foresight and planning and development for the college. He really got a lot of these things started.
He did, and he isn't, like, say when we applied for our ACSB accreditation, he had done enough work and had enough people come in to evaluate us and so on, so that he didn't want to apply till he felt sure we would be accepted, and we were.
He did it. The timing was good.
He planned it, and you know.
And that really was a big event in the life of the university
big.
and your college, of
Very
course, too,
big.
wasn't it? Now, some other people that come to memory. Let's stay in your college for a while, and then we can go outside it.
Of course, Lita Holly was started in our college, and eventually, of course, was moved over to education. But I've worked with her all the years that she was on campus.
What were some of the traits that you remember well and still do from Lita's life and her work here?
Well, I think she has a very sincere interest in her students, and also her family. She's been very close and very supportive of her family over the years. But she's really a professional, I believe, and I think her sincere interest in students is a very important part of her.
Herf Davison you mentioned a while ago. I remember him. What about that fellow? He was an interesting guy in my book.
Yes, he was very interesting. And he came in and really developed the retailing program.
Did it almost begin with him?
Pretty much, yes. Certainly as a separate entity. It was. I think we'd had probably a basic, like, principles of retailing as a part of the marketing program, but he really developed so that you could have a major in retailing.
Another name that you've mentioned 2 or 3 times in the tape that we've been making here, this Reflections, Joyce, is Glenn Lewis. What was Glenn like?
Glenn was an individual. I think they broke the mold when they made him. But he again was absolutely one of the most sincere people I've ever known. So concerned about the standards of, say, in real estate was his big interest, and he has students, I'm sure, still in Omaha who are very, very successful in the real estate field.
Yes, I think a lot of business people remember fondly from in an educational way and professional way, Glenn Lewis. Other people that cross your mind as we sort of reminisce here a little bit, Joyce?
Well, of course, we've mentioned Bill Hockett. He's been for a long time, and Verda Rausch was also in our college for a number of years in the secretarial field. Frank Forbes, business law. I remember when his 2 children were born, and they're both in college now.
Another name that you mentioned that really is a giant in our history was Dr. Payne.
Oh, yes.
What stands out in your memory about old Dr. Payne?
He was such a, I guess, intellectual is the real word for him. Very precise, tended to use kind of $64 words, but again, very, very knowledgeable.
Did you ever call him by just his first name?
Very few people ever did that.
No.
I think Mr. Lucas did.
Yeah.
Not very many.
But there was a small select group.
Jim Earle.
Oh, yeah.
I had my math course with him out at the old science building.
Now, a lot of these people that you're mentioning really were the roots that made this tree, aren't they?
Right.
We had some very strong and interesting people here in those earlier days.
Very much so.
Yeah. And of course, you worked with more than one president of this university.
Yes.
With a goodly number of them. Your impressions and remembrance. Let's talk about Dr. Haynes first. He was the first one, really, that you related to, wasn't he? What was he like?
Of course, I had very little actual contact with him, but he always impressed me as kind of a very friendly and sincere easygoing, although I don't think he really was. But he never seemed to get real, ruffled. And to say my actual contacts with him were pretty few, but always friendly.
Now, as you describe him, I think of the man who came next, Dr. Mabel L. What were your impressions of him? He was a little different, wasn't he?
Very much so. He was, I don't know how to say it, but he knew what he wanted to do and where he was going to go and how he was going to get there. But you knew where you stood with him, and I don't think if you were, something was turned down, you knew why. But he also, I think he was very good in the community, contacts with people in Omaha.
He started to really build our community contacts, don't you think?
Very much, yes.
Under his
did.
administration. During these years, as the university grew and changed, were you always comfortable here? Was it always like things were going in a way you'd like to see them go, Joyce?
Basically, I would say yes. Sometimes it's been hard. I can remember when I knew everybody on campus. I can remember when I knew everybody in my college. Now some of them, sometimes they come and go in my college, and I don't even know them.
Joyce Minteer, you've been a teacher for a long, long time. Why in the world didn't you do something else? What's there been about teaching that was such an attraction for you?
Well, to me it seemed the best way to use my business knowledge that I had to try to impart it to students and to give them something that they could really use once they left the university and were on the job.
Has it given you a feeling of real satisfaction?
Most of the time. Most of the time, or I still wouldn't be here.
No.
But teaching sometimes is kind of discouraging too.
Oh yeah.
You feel like you're not getting across sometimes, and then somebody will surprise you and make you feel real good.
Now, teaching from the 40s to the 80s, in effect, I would think that it involved some change. Have you changed a lot in the way you teach? You and I have both become older over the years, but do we change our stripes? Do we turn it all around? How's that part of it been? Just the way you do it, the methodology.
I wouldn't say totally, but different techniques. I sometimes make use of overheads and opaque projector. Would like to do more, but sometimes it doesn't work out as well.
But you use things and techniques and tools more than you used to. Used to be straight lecture, blackboard demonstration, that kind of thing.
Lecture, and I do like to have some discussion. Because students always have, they always can come up with something that you never thought of.
Yeah, isn't that the case?
Which makes things interesting. And I like students to ask questions.
Speaking of students, and you've had lots of them, what would you say if you're going to draw a picture of a good student, of what he or she might be like? Has that changed with you over the years? Not really, I don't think. I still like a student who does prepare, is well prepared, and is willing to contribute in class and come up with ideas, suggestions. And to that extent, I think this is still true. If you're going to make a list, Joyce, of the most satisfying thing about teaching, the thing that you really enjoyed the most, or things you've enjoyed the most, what would you say they might be? What are the rewards? Not the monetary ones, but the personal ones. I know you've become rich over the years.
Oh, yes, undoubtedly. Well, the most rewarding thing doesn't happen very often. But when it what it is when I meet a former student who will tell me how much they're using what they learned in that class, and they wish they'd paid more attention when they were there. And when you run into a student who's now employed and really, and says they're really making use of what they learned in that class, this to me is the best reward.
That's the real graduation ceremony.
It sure is.
When they come back. I guess along that line, what we could do is we wind up reflecting on your life and your time at the university, Joyce, would be just take the university in your memory totally. The people, the teachers, the students, the facilities, and the major years of your life that you've devoted to the university. What would be some of the reasons you've liked it here and enjoyed it and stayed here for these many, many years?
I guess basically it would be people. I felt I've had good administrators to work under, and I think we have a good student body here. We have students who are here because most of them are paying their own way, and they really want to learn and want to get something out of it. And I think that gives you a little different group of people to work with than might be true on say on a strictly dorm campus. But the people you have to work with and work under, both administrators, faculty, and students, because you can put up with not quite so adequate facilities if you have the right kind of people to work with.
You know, one of these years, Joyce, you and I are going to have to retire. Got any ideas what you're going to do? What you'd like to do? You just want to sit and sort of look at the yard? What do you got in mind?
Well, no special plans. I hope I can spend more time in the yard than I do now. I do some volunteer work now, and I would like to do more volunteer work.
Oh, what kinds of volunteer work do you do?
I work at the gift shop at Methodist Hospital, just two Saturday nights a month. Then also I belong to Altrusa, which is an international women's service organization. And one of the things that we're going to be doing this next month is working with be a camp for children with cancer. And we had a fundraiser last Saturday, and then we're going out the first day of the camp to help the youngsters find their cabins and kind of orient them. We've worked with the Callum Girls Club. We've been painting some of their terribly badly in need looking rooms. We give them nice fresh coats of paint. So that through that organization I do quite a bit. But I'd work more at the hospital than I do now if I had more time.
Well, it sounds like you're going to keep, as you have been, busy, busy, busy in the months and years ahead. And Joyce, you know, I think I speak for the university generally when I say thank you, not only for joining me on this hour or so of reflecting on time, but for all the years of service and dedication that you've given to our University of Omaha and our University of Nebraska at Omaha. I appreciate your being with me today, and as we wind this segment up, we should sort of tie it together and put a ribbon on it by saying the summer of 1985, when we've been recording here in the what we call the Hyper Building at UNO, and my guest has been Joyce Minteer, Dr. Joyce Minteer, a member of our business faculty for a long time, been with the university since 1938 really, and before as a student, and for into the 40s and 80s as a part of our staff and as our faculty. We thank Joyce, and we thank all of you for being with us for another edition of what we like to call Reflections in Time.